it gets to a point where you can't hear me in the back, just sort of wave your arm or give me some kind of signal, one of these numbers, and I'll try to speak up. It's a big room, and without a microphone, this might be a little challenging. Let me start off by saying my name is Alan Wilgus. I'm a very comfortable retiree right now. I drove down here from the Villages. How many people are familiar with the Villages? That's where they warehouse the old folks, right? And so I've been sort of blissfully retired there for about the last 4.5 years. But I try not to turn down an opportunity to speak to people about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. And that is the effect the media has on us as a society today. Because the fact is, and I'm sure you're well aware of it, that there has never probably in the history of mankind been so much information that's readily available to each and every one of us. How many people have one of these in their pocket? Yeah, okay, a sea of hands, right? And it makes me wonder sometimes, do people ever use libraries anymore? Because it seems to me that everything you would want to know is accessible through that one little tool in our pocket. But the thing that also concerns me is the fact that we are now susceptible, more than ever, to misinformation because of how we are bombarded day in, day out, almost around the clock, by information. 24-hour news cycles, access to the internet, emails. Much of this stuff did not exist 20 or 30 years ago, yet today it's part of our day-to-day life. And interestingly enough, for many people, it becomes difficult. The lines are actually blurred between what we're receiving and whether its intent is to inform or to influence. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. Back in 1957, there was a journalist and social critic by the name of Vance Packard that wrote a very provocative book called The Hidden Persuaders. And I'd like to take a moment and read the opening paragraph. This book is an attempt to explore a strange and rather exotic new area of American life. It is about the large-scale efforts being made, often with impressive success, to channel our unthinking habits, our purchasing decisions, and our thought processes by the use of insights gleaned from psychiatry and social sciences. Typically, these efforts take place beneath our level of awareness, so that the appeals which move us are often, in a sense, hidden. The result is that many of us are being influenced and manipulated far more than we realize in the patterns of our everyday life. Who are these hidden persuaders that Packard talks about? Well, quite honestly, they permeate our society today. Much of the reason for us being here today is because many of those influencers, many of those hidden persuaders are hate mongers. What we're more familiar with probably are advertisers, politicians, authors, bloggers, even paid speakers in some regards. And what do those people have in common? What they have in common is oftentimes their intent is not to inform us but to influence us. How do politicians attempt to influence you? They want you to vote, right? How do advertisers influence you? They want you to buy their product. And some of them are not very subtle. But yeah, authors want you to buy their books. Bloggers want you to go to their blog site. And so the techniques that they use can be very manipulative. About 30 years ago, I was a young Army officer, and the military sent me to the Special Warfare School at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to train me as a psychological operations officer, which is a big fancy word that stands for nothing more than I was trained to be a propagandist. And it's interesting because about 10 years ago, well into my retirement from the military, and far removed from those days when I was a PSYOPs officer, I began to get what I thought were very alarming emails from good friends of mine. And we're talking about people with high intellect, educated. Much of it was Islamophobic in nature. And I began to look at these emails and recognize some of the very same techniques that I was taught back in 1971 as a young lieutenant. At PSYOP school, these same techniques were being employed as far as this hate email. And I began to push back on people. And of course, there's a consequence to pushing back, and we can talk about that later. But it dawned on me that these techniques are beneath the level of awareness that Packard talks about, and yet are very powerful in terms of influencing behavior. And from that point on, I began talking, like I'm talking to you, about bringing into our awareness these techniques. So what are these techniques? Well, first off, let's talk about propaganda. Is propaganda good or bad? Can be both, right? There are examples of very good propaganda. If you think about the campaigns to stop forest fires, Smokey the Bear. In fact, you see him now again on TV, I noticed. He's been around a long time. There were campaigns to quit smoking cessation, campaigns as far as use of seatbelts. And so these are designed to influence you, but to influence you in a positive way, okay, in terms of public safety and your health. But typically, what propagandists attempt to do is present facts selectively. In other words, I am only going to present the facts that support my case, and certainly not present opposing facts. The facts may be true, they may be false, or they may be unknown, which is important when you begin to see articles, read blogs, get emails. What is the source? Where is it coming from? Is it true? One of the things that was interesting, I remember some years back, is everybody familiar with Jeff Foxworthy, the comedian? What's his big shtick? You may be a redneck if, right? That's his big thing. Well, someone was circulating a Islamophobic email, supposedly from Jeff Foxworthy, that said you may be a Muslim if, with a series of very derogatory comments. Come to find out, if you research it, Foxworthy had nothing to do with that. And yet it didn't stop someone who felt that by putting the name Foxworthy, hiding their hatred within the context of his jokes, they could influence the rest of us. Well, if Foxworthy believes it, must be some truth to it, right? But again, this is what we have to face when we come in touch with emails or other media that is hate-filled. It takes different forms, as we talked about. It could be written, it could be internet. It comes at us from many directions and many different forms. So, there are certain techniques that I saw, that I recognized, that I identified from my years ago. And let me just talk about a few of them very quickly. Bandwagon. As you might suspect, a technique that a propagandist used is called bandwagon, in the sense that everybody has this inherent need to feel part of the group. The need for inclusion is strong within human beings. And so some years ago, Pepsi-Cola had a big thing where if you drank Pepsi, you were part of the in crowd. Wow, who doesn't want to be part of the in crowd, right? And so you want to, if you look at hate email, often the appeals are to, every good Christian should know this. Every good citizen should be informed of this. Well, I want to be considered a good citizen, so I better read this and take it seriously, right? Bandwagon can be a very powerful technique in propaganda. Card stacking. We talked about this a little bit earlier as far as selectively relaying facts that support your case. That's all card stacking is. I'm going to tell you everything wrong about this group of and hope that you will take that data, which may or may not be true, and come to a conclusion that I want you to come to. In this case, hatred and bias. Okay? Glittering generalities. You find this all the time, especially in politics during this political cycle. Essentially what glittering generalities do is connect that person or that product to something that is very positive in people's minds. For example, honor. You see very powerful words like honor, liberty, defense of democracy, our Christian values. You'll see these very powerful, emotion-laden words that are connected to the primary message that's being given. Unfortunately, that message is often one of hatred. Name-calling. I'm thinking of this political cycle where we, wow, it's right there, right? And of course, name-calling is, as its name implies, is to associate someone with a derogatory comment. Now, throughout our history, name-calling has been a very common technique. In fact, essentially during warfare, you find it all the time. Go back to any war, World War II, the Japanese were Jacks. Right? You look at Nazi Germany and some of the buildup to the Holocaust. The Nazis compared Jews to rodents, in a sense, to dehumanize them. And that's what typically is the objective of name-calling, is to dehumanize a hated group. Plain folks, another technique. Why does Donald Trump, who is a billionaire, walk around with a baseball cap? Why does Hillary Clinton, when she goes near the coal mines of North Carolina, put a hard hat on? To identify with the local people, to project upon the audience that they are just one of them, therefore increasing their believability. Does anybody remember Sarah Palin from a couple cycles back? She was excellent at this. She was just a soccer mom, like everybody else, right? And she came across that way in how she spoke, her articulation, her accent, and that's done deliberately. And essentially what you're trying to do is connect the speaker and the ideas that the speaker is projecting to the audience in a way that they can relate to. Testimonials. Again, in the political season, you see a lot of that. But you see it in just about any form of media that's attempting to influence you. Xarelto, which I think is a blood thinner. The late Arnold Palmer would be talking about, I use it, race car drivers, NASCAR drivers. My God, if they use it, it must be good stuff, right? And that's the intent in terms of advertisement. But even in a political season, what people strive for is what? An endorsement, right? Now, the trick, though, is for a testimonial to work, it has to be someone that's highly respected to your target audience. Which is a dilemma now, because if you're looking for a political endorsement, most politicians in this country are held in very low esteem by the populace, correct? Which is why probably one of the best endorsements that Donald Trump has gotten throughout this political cycle was not from a politician, but from who? Bobby Knight, remember when he was in Indiana? I mean, Bobby Knight is like worshipped in Indiana because of his basketball record. And so for testimonials to be effective, they have to come from people that are respected by your audience. Finally, transfer. Interestingly enough, whenever you see a politician on stage, what do you see lined up behind them?
American flag.
American flag. That's not by accident, is it? Essentially what transfer does, it transfers the prestige of some symbol, some person, some environment to that speaker. In other words, with all those American flags behind me, at least on an unconscious level, that person's words, that person's ideas are being elevated because of that, what that flag represents. Okay? interesting thing about all of these techniques is that they're subtle. Often they occur below our level of awareness. And they're particularly designed to short-circuit our intellect by appealing to our emotions. Let me say that again. They are designed to short-circuit our intellect by appealing to our emotions. One of the most powerful influencers is fear.
Fear.
Fear. To make you frightened. If I'm a hate monger, the more fear I can thrust out there, the more examples that support that, the more powerful my message. Which gets to stereotyping. Because oftentimes, a singular event is taken and generalized to an entire population. Hate mongers will have you believe that every Muslim in this country supports ISIL. And yet, those terrorists do not represent the religion and comprise a very small percent of Muslims worldwide. And yet a hate monger will generalize those few people to all of Islam. Same thing happens in this political season. And I'm talking about both parties. Certainly Donald Trump is the person that's the outsider, is projecting fear upon the populace. This is screwed up, our nation's going to the dogs. Elect me, I can turn it around. But you see it with the Democrats as well. Recently, I saw a retired politician by the name of Bradley, who was a moderate, he was a moderate Democrat. And he's paying for advertisements that it's a picture of a nuclear explosion. Pretty frightening, right? And what he's saying in that message is if you elect Donald Trump, this could be the consequence. Doesn't have the temperament. And so fear is used on both sides. It's certainly used by the advertising industry. I remember there was a heart medicine a couple of years back, Plavix, I think it is. And this was amazing. In the commercial, this guy's walking around, and there's a gurney following him. You ever seen that one? This thing, he turns around, the gurney follows him. And it's like at any second, this guy's going to drop dead. Okay, so you better keep that gurney handy. I mean, talk about fear. I got to talk to my doctor about that stuff. I may need it, right? And so it's subtle. Often fear is used, and gross generalizations are the order of the day. So, I want you to think about these techniques. And I apologize because typically I'd have some overheads where you could jot this stuff down. I don't have them with me. I have them with me, but we don't have a means of projecting them. But bandwagon, card stacking, glittering generalities, name calling, plain folks, testimonials, and transfer. That's it. But those in combination can be very effective in influencing people. Okay. We talked about different types of media that's employed. In this age of Photoshop, you have to be very suspect of even images that are sent to you or portrayed in the media. There was one picture that was just all over the internet. It was taken, I think, in Gaza. A bunch of men, adult men that were in tuxedos, and little girls in dresses. And it's a whole row of these men with a whole row of little girls next to them holding their hands. And the narrative under that picture was, Hamas plays host to pedophiles. So the narrative there is, oh my God, these savage people, the grown men are taking little 4- and to show is the complete story, the context about that. In reality, those little girls were nothing more than our equivalent to flower girls that precede the bride and groom down the aisle. The actual brides were a side in that picture. But that's how photos can be deceiving as well. There was another one that went viral on the internet. It was a man that was knelt down with his son extended under the front tire of an automobile. The narrative there was that this is Sharia law. In this Muslim country, this young child was caught stealing a loaf of bread and is now being punished in accordance with Sharia law. And of course, my God, you look at that and you say, that's outrageous. Those savages, terrible people, right? Well, if you actually investigated that picture, went online, you found it was one of a succession of pictures that essentially was showing a street magician who, and the picture after the car rolled over, the kid's standing up, his arm is fine, smile on his face, and the dad's passing the hat. Taken out of context, okay? And so the question here is, can you believe your eyes when you see this stuff? Not always. When we think about the news media, and this is where I apologize for not having the power to show these things. I usually put two pictures up there. One of them is a picture that was taken in London at a protest march, and a bunch of Muslims have posters, behead the infidel, blah, 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 blah. Frightening, right? Got massive coverage through the U.S. media. Next to that, there's another picture that did not make the front page, or was not highlighted in the media. And that is Islam, another group of Muslims, marching with American flags and signs that says Islam is against terrorism. Which one sells more papers, do you think? Sure, more sensational. My second career I spent as a management consultant. And I remember I had a huge national communications company as a client. And I had an opportunity to actually get into newspapers, get into TV stations, and observe how news is reported. And it's almost a cliche now, but it's true. If it bleeds, it leads. Within News Channel 5, for example, in Nashville, in their newsroom, they've got a police scanner that's going 24/7, and somebody's monitoring it. And if something sensational is going on, they're firing out there. And so, just like everybody else, there's a motive. Their motive is to sell papers. And this isn't new, by the way. Back in the 20s, there was a competition in New York City between Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. They both owned daily newspapers. One was a New York Journal, the other was the New York Word at the time. And they developed, between the two of them, a technique called yellow journalism. Now you see it with the Daily News, the New York Post, huge headlines, the intent of which is to grab your attention, to spike your curiosity so that you'll buy it, right? You're being manipulated. You see the same technique with the tabloids. National Enquirer, right? Huge headlines. And you look at those headlines and you go, my gosh, is that real? Can that be true? And that's exactly what they want you to do. Put down your money and see if it's true, right? And oftentimes, the article has nothing to do with the headlines, does it? But one of the things that's common is you see a lot of exclamation points in those front pages, right? Sensationalism. It sells. It sold back in around the turn of the century for Pulitzer and Hearst. It sells today. Let's fast forward. Today, you get on the internet. How many people are on Facebook? A bunch of you are. Facebook. You see the same thing. You see sensational headlines that tell you the front end of some sensational thing that's really hard to believe. And why is that? They want you to click on it, right? They want you to go to the website. Again, it is to manipulate you in a way that causes you to behave in the manner that they want you to behave. The other thing about the internet is that there are fake news sites on the internet. I mean, how many times have you spoke to a person that has some outlandish idea and it strikes you as odd and you ask them, well, where did you hear that? They said, well, it was on the internet. As if it's on the internet, it must be true, right? Well, is that the case? No, it's not. In fact, there are a number of fake news sites that deliberately pump out garbage. And it's sensationalism. It's designed to get you to click on that site. And why is that? That's how they make money, right? They drive traffic to that website. The more clicks it gets, the more advertisers pay. Again, we're being manipulated. And so, not everything on there is the gospel, is it? Empire News, American News, the Daily Current. Those are 3 examples of fake news sites. Now, how do they get away with that? How do they avoid litigation? Very simple. If you go to their website and you dig deep into their explanation of their purpose, they claim to be satirical. It's satire. We didn't really mean that. We're just entertaining people. But what they're doing is that oftentimes they're spreading messages of hate. Blog sites, another thing. Somebody says something outrageous. Where'd you hear that? Well, it was on the internet. On the internet? Where? Oh, it was in a blog. Can you believe everything you hear on a blog? What is a blog? It's opinion, right? It's somebody's opinion. Oftentimes, not as good and probably worse than your own opinion, right? And yet, again, what is their motive? Their motive is to drive traffic to that blog site. And what's very interesting is you'll see something sensational and you'll go, is that true? And you'll go to Google it, and what you find the same article, 4 other references to it, but guess who's posting it as a reference? Other bloggers. And so it's incestual, okay? They use each other as references, but none of that has anything to do with whether it's true. They'd like you to believe it, but it has nothing to do with it. How many people are aware of the term clickbaiting? Okay. Clickbaiting is nothing more than you get on Facebook, for example. And have you ever seen these things where this poor child is in a hospital bed, cancer victim, has lost her hair because of chemotherapy, and the narrative there says, tell Adeline that she's beautiful as she is, by clicking. Let's get 1 million clicks. The majority of time you're being set up. Because what people are doing is, according to the Facebook algorithm, the more clicks a website gets, the higher it's raised in terms of priority viewing, okay? And what a lot of people will do is they'll post something, or else, can you see this magic number? Or some wild, wacky thing like that. And once they get their clicks to 3 or 4 million, they scrub the website and they put a scam on it. In other words, they're trying to deceive people, once they get the traffic volume up where they want it, into buying something or believing something that is not true or is a scam. Clickbaiting. The same thing with a concept called like farming. Have you heard of that? Same concept. If you see something that, especially in a political season, if you start hitting that like button, realize that oftentimes what you're doing may be just helping somebody make money as opposed to entertaining or you're being manipulated, basically, okay? So take it seriously before you hit that button. And of course, we spread we spread misinformation through sharing. Okay? If you see something outrageous, it should be a red flag to you. Investigate it. Is it true? Just don't say, wow, that's pretty frightening. I better share that with all my friends. This happens on the internet now. Back in the old days, at least among old guys like me, we saw this with emails. We saw it with emails all the time. Because typically, we would get an email, and number one, the first thing you notice is that the author is unknown. Okay, who wrote this? Where'd it come from? What's the source? You never know. They don't reveal it. Or they'll say a reliable source told us, or they'll say a military officer that was stationed in Saudi Arabia just relayed to me, or another person of high prestige, an airline pilot that has spent years in blah, 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 some Arab country. And so that's how they try to get you to believe it, okay? Someone that we hold in high esteem, right? It's an outlandish claim. It's alarmist. Red flag should go up, right? Appeals to your patriotism, your faith, or your humanity. Remember we talked about glittering generalities. Every patriot needs to read this because it's so important. Every good Christian should see this. Look for the use of those propaganda techniques. Am I getting a balanced view of what they're portraying? Am I getting the pros and the cons? Or are they just card stacking? If it insists that it is not a hoax, false, or a rumor, guess what? It probably is, okay? And in fact, they get so slick about this that oftentimes in some Islamophobic email in particular, at the very bottom, they'll say, this has been verified by Snopes. Everybody knows what Snopes is, right? Hoaxslayer. There's a number of websites where you can go and try to see if something is true or not, whether it's just some urban legend or whether it's just some hate-spewing bigot or something. This has been verified by Snopes. So you don't have to worry about verifying. It's true. The problem is they count on people being intellectually lazy and not actually clicking on that link. Because if you click on that link, guess what you're going to find? The Snopes homepage. Or nothing. But again, they count on us being intellectually lazy and not pursuing it, not going through the trouble of trying to verify, is this true or isn't it true? Here is when you step back and you look at this, a single person anywhere in the world with an internet connection can spread hatred and fear worldwide. That's what the internet has empowered the individual with. Okay? It used to be governments did this. Now just an individual, a hate-filled individual can do this. And how does it spread? Through us. Through us. In the old days with emails, all of these hate-filled emails would always end with the same thing. Share this with your neighbors. Tell all your friends. Something like that, right? You've seen these emails, haven't you? Isn't that what they end with? You got to tell as many people as possible. And what do? If we don't realize that we're being manipulated, hey, this is a disturbing email. It's frightening. I care for all my friends and family. I better share it with them, right? It takes advantage of our nature as human beings. But what we're doing is we're being, in a sense, unconscious co-conspirators in sharing a hate-filled message. Which is why, and this is really the crux of what I want to talk about today, that is why critical thinking is such a important thing for us to focus on as we take in these messages, as we are bombarded with all this information. Our ability to think critically is what reverses much of the misinformation that's out there, which allows us to think freely and not be manipulated in terms of our worldview. Okay? And hopefully, that's what you're learning in this institution of higher learning, right? Is how to use your head. Not just accept things as being true, but to question, to push back, to say, is that really the truth? Or does that person or that company or that politician, do they have an agenda that they're simply throwing my way? So, I would encourage all of you to be skeptical, to suspend judgment until you've gathered all the facts. It's interesting, even for us old guys sitting around this table, you're going to meet some of these just very distinguished panelists. We were having a casual conversation, and it got to the murder rate in a great American city. And somebody said, well, I think it's such and such, and a couple people said, well, that doesn't sound right. Guess what? Fact check. We had 3 different fact checkers going simultaneously. And that's what I'm talking about. It's about being skeptical, it's about suspending judgment, it's about checking things out. Ask yourself what purpose the message serves. Are they trying to sell me something? Are they trying to influence my vote? Are they trying to spread hate? Whatever, ask yourself. Claims of authenticity may not be true. You can't always believe it. And you can't always believe what you see. So what can we do about this? Now that I'm aware of how these subtle techniques influence me, what can I do about it? This is the hard part. If you get an email that's hate-filled, clearly an attempt to spread hatred, what do? You push back. The last thing you do is you don't send it on, right?